And here we go. We're live. Welcome to the Sovereign Way. My name is Elizabeth, and I am your tour guide for the next hour, give or take. Remember, you are playing along with a delicious and unusual immersion in the Sovereign Way to read the Bible. Now, so far, we've examined what the Bible is. What is this thing? And we've also examined what makes the sovereign lens so unique and so exciting in its ability to reveal through biblical scripture the true relationship between consciousness, energy, and form, and how we master this dynamic for a really miraculous experience of a sovereign life and spiritual becoming. Now, last week, we studied the sovereign mastery of remembering, which is remembering who we really are, remembering what we're really made of, remembering how manifest reality comes to be, and what our role is as sovereign masters in representing that universal function. So that leads us to this week's immersion, which is, if we can remember the truth, then we can also recognize its opposite. So that's logical. That's one of my favorite things about the Sovereign Way, is that it's so extremely logical. The first mastery is remembering, because you can't build on your spiritual development. You can't do anything in life as an enlightened master if you haven't mastered the art of remembering that that's what you are. And you certainly can't recognize evil or falsehood or structure or system thinking if you haven't first remembered the truth. So we build on remembering, and then we move into recognizing. I remember the truth and I recognize what is not. So remember from last week, as an evolutionary human consciousness, we made the collective choice to embody a knowing of good and evil. So by consequence, therefore, we energetically project and therefore experience both good and evil. Let's look quickly at the model of human consciousness. The Garden of Eden is an energetic, or perhaps we should say an essential field of quantum possibility. And in the human consciousness, we have embodied the ability to know the difference between good and evil, to know good and to know evil, which means that we are projecting all the time judgments about good and evil, and therefore experiencing both good and evil. In the first 5 days of creation, in the biblical mythology of creation, God was creating increasingly sentient manifestations. And at every level, he looked at his creation and said, it is good. It wasn't actually until the human consciousness made that choice to eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's when we get first a glimpse into the idea that we can create something that is not good. Up until this point, God has said, let there be light, and it is good. And now we've come along and we've chosen, against higher judgment, we've chosen to know good and evil, and therefore we project good and evil, and we experience good and evil. So from this point on in the story, for the rest of the story, we're dealing with the consequence of that choice, of being such evolutionary creatures that create and experience good and evil. So that's what we're dealing with. So it would help if we could tell the difference, right? If we could actually look at our creation and tell the difference, and therefore in telling the difference, know where to align, know where to choose, what to enhance, what to nourish, and what to grow, and choose what to release. It'd be good to know the difference. You can't release story, evil, trauma, pain if you don't know what it is. So that's kind of the next step for a sovereign life, is to recognize. If I am in vibrational relation with good and evil, I'd like to be able to discern which frequency I'm engaging with at any given time. So the second mastery in the Sovereign Way is recognizing. recognizing good versus evil is honestly a class we could spend a lifetime on. We could unwrap this forever and ever and ever, which is why we have a 5-week accelerator class that is a private education where you'll immerse in the masteries of discerning good versus evil and hearing from God. So you'll really learn how you hear from God, how you nurture and cultivate a personal relationship with God. And we can spend 5 weeks on an immersion privately to get this really, really embodied in your knowing. But for today, we're going to unwrap this logically. So I'm going to give you the highlights, the outlines, the absolute necessary distinctions that are really, really going to shed some light on this for you. So we're going to look at this logically, and we're going to see what the Bible has for us. What does it say? Before we dive in, let's look at evil through the sovereign lens. That's the first step. Let's look at evil through the sovereign lens. First of all, if all things are source, spirit, and substance, and all things are unified and entangled in the very fabric of reality, then all frequencies of expression are available in all coordinates of time and space. If we could separate evil from good, then we would have a linear universe. Put your hand up if you think our universe is linear. I can't see any hands. I can't see any hands. We all believe, we all agree that the universe is quantum, which means that all frequencies of expression are available in all coordinates of time and space. So that means that we're not looking for evil out here in a linear sense. We're not looking for evil as a manifest thing, claiming that any identity or ideology or person is evil. But instead, we're recognizing that evil is a quality of expression that is characterized by how it pivots your consciousness from ascension, becoming more like God, to entropy, becoming less like God. So we can tell that it is evil, not by what it is or what it looks like, but its quality. Is it pivoting your attention from truth, from the truth that all things are source, spirit, and substance at once? Is it taking your attention away from this truth and causing you to invest in particularized reality as the source of your power? Is it convincing you to look away from God and to move into spiritual entropy? That is the quality of evil. That's what we're looking for. We're not looking for a thing or an ideology or a political icon. We're not trying to discern what out there is evil and what out there is good. We are simply discerning the quality of what the frequency does to us. Because remember, sin and evil is characterized subjectively, depending on the framework of consciousness that's viewing it. So that's important to remember. So in the sovereign way, we're not looking for evil out there. We're not looking for evil out there. We're looking for evil as an expression. Yes. So evil pivots our attention from God, from truth, and brings our attention away from what truth? What truth? The truth of quantum renewal and everlasting love. We've been discussing in our student group recently what programs cannot be unprogrammed. When is a structure so structured that it cannot be unstructured? And any time we've invested in the idea that a structure cannot be unstructured, then we are under the influence. That is illusion. So the truth is quantum renewal, everlasting love, ever possibility, ever resurrection. And the moment our attention is directed onto what is manifest, structured and illusion, and we're invested in structures like ego, like ideology, like iconic figures, like certain systems of governance, right? Or certain diets over other diets. As soon as we've become invested in such structures, we have not invested our faith in the eternal, I am Christ. If we're not looking at source, spirit, and substance as the eternal truth, and we're not looking towards I am Christ, but we're looking towards the possibility of death, degeneration, and depression, that's when we know we're looking the wrong way. Okay, so that's the overhead summary. Let's go a little bit deeper. Paul writes in Ephesians 2:1-2. So second chapter, first and second verse in Ephesians, Paul writes, you were made dead through the crimes and sins that used to make up your life, when you were living by the principles of this world, and thus obeying the ruler who dominates the very air. It's a tricky passage. I'll say it again, this time listen for each sentence. You were made dead through the crimes and sins that used to make up your life, when you were living by the principles of this world, and thus obeying the ruler who dominates the very air. This is important here. It's in the air. It's in the air. So if we're made in the image of God and our shadow lives in us, then evil lives in God. Evil is an idea in the mind of God, just like joy, just like community, just like abundance. The serpent was already there in the garden. We didn't invent it. There it was. As it says right here in Genesis 3:1, it says, now the snake was more subtle than any of the natural animals that God had made. More subtle. He said to Eve, this is the snake saying to Eve, did God say, don't eat of any of the trees? And the woman said, oh, we can eat fruit from any tree, but not the one in the middle. God said, if we eat fruit from that tree, we will die. And the serpent said, you will not die. God knows that if you eat of that tree, your eyes will be opened and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. So the woman saw that the tree was desirable. She saw that it was a delight to the eyes and it would give them power like God. And so she ate of the fruit and shared it with her man who was there too. And their eyes were opened and their vulnerability was exposed, and now they knew shame. So there are a few things here to notice. First, evil is subtle. It doesn't always have horns and a pitchfork. It's not always so obvious. It's subtle. The snake didn't outright lie to the human mind, but it manipulated its understanding. It seduced Adam and Eve into thinking first that God was wrongfully hiding or withholding something from them. How often do you think that? Oh, fairly often. Why aren't you showing me everything that I'm asking for you to show me? This idea that God is withholding something from them. In other words, that what isn't good enough. And second, that they ought to individually have the same power as the Almighty Source. So these are the two first characteristics that we see coming from this subtle frequency. It's manipulating the human understanding by claiming two things: that God is withholding something that he ought not to, and that we should individually have the same power, status as the Almighty Source. So, to summarize that, in the garden of all possibility, there exists a function that can seduce the mind into believing that the source of your power is out here in particularized reality, right? Where all things become structured and manifest, that is the source of your power. So if you want to be really empowered, if you want to be really, really strong and really empowered and sovereign in your choice making, in your thinking processes, and in your feeling function in life, you need to stop thinking about evil in terms of its manifestations. You need to stop thinking about evil as the product of our unhealed ancestral shit, and start thinking of it as an environmental hazard. Why? Because that disarms the threat, and it makes you sovereign in a reality which moment by moment is made of light flashing from wave potential to particle reality over and over again instantaneously. In other words, you can be sovereign in a reality which responds to your judgment and your decision making. So that in any given moment, you don't need to be collapsing potential by a judgment that it is evil. Remember, God said, he created and said it is good. So it was his judgment that made agreement with creation as being good. So when you're living in a reality that is made of light, that is flashing in and out of potential, be sovereign enough in your decision making that you're able to make agreement with what is good. If, however, you're convinced that evil is inherent in you, then you, okay, all right, let's imagine this. If evil is an environmental hazard, in other words, it's weather, it's subtle snake in the garden, not a problem in me. If evil is an environmental hazard, then when I go out in the rain, I don't need to sit for an hour in meditation to reconcile the past life in which I was drowned as a witch. No, I just need an umbrella. That's all. But if I've convinced myself that there is no evil, there's no such thing as evil, that it's all on the inside, that everything I see out there is a reflection of what's on the inside, then whenever my biofield discerns the frequency of deception or the frequency of manipulation, I will find myself looking for the manifestations of fault forever. I will forever be looking in myself or in others, trying to eradicate or avoid it. And I'll either declare them evil, they're the ones who have the darkness inside of them, or I'll say, hang on a minute, they're a reflection of me, so I'm the one who's full of darkness. I'd better get back into my never-ending shadow work to heal all my misery. Stop it. Stop it. It's not in you, it's in the air. It's in all things as a choice. Now, evil does have a purpose. It wasn't an accident. Nothing God does is an accident. So evil has a purpose. It's a coding in the collective consciousness that helps to keep our awareness on illusion. So if Christ is a state of consciousness that is fully remembered and fully realized as divine, then Antichrist is the opposite. Fully separate, fully voided illusion, notness, right? Notness as opposed to isness. Now, the directive that we were given in the garden, if you remember from last week, the directive we were given in the garden is to uphold and nurture what is good and true, to cultivate what is good and true. So, and then that's why we're instructed not to eat, to embody the knowing of the good and evil, because we will surely die a spiritual death of declining awareness, a sense of separation from wholeness. So we're instructed to choose to embody the things that are good, cultivate the goodness. And we do know in our hearts what is true. We do know love. This is the first thing we are given before we chose to eat the the apple, the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, before we made that choice, we were in the garden told to cultivate what is good. Now, notice in Genesis 3:1, falsehood doesn't tell the human mind what to do. It simply questions. It simply says, really? Did God say that? Did God say that you would die if you eat the apple? God knows you won't die if you eat the apple. So again, the frequency of evil doesn't oppose the truth, but it takes it and twists it and introduces doubt. So there's a difference between evil and error. You make a mistake, it doesn't mean you're evil. Evil is specifically taking truth, twisting it, and introducing doubt, and then seducing your awareness by offering all sorts of egoic benefits. If you eat the fruit, you'll be like a god. Twists your perspective, and then you make decisions from that twisted perspective. So we can personify this frequency or quality. We can give it a name, like Satan or Lucifer or the enemy, to help us to relate to it, to help us to identify it. But of course, personifying it doesn't help if we then reduce it to a particularized reality. If we now say that it's an entity or a thing, that evil has its own little godhead thing, that's not useful, because then we start looking for it out there instead of discerning the quality of it. But to personify evil is useful because when it helps us to relate to it, when it helps us to identify its operations. So here's the antidote. This is written in Genesis 3:11. When the human mind repeats the lie that it's been given or that it's been manipulated into, when the human mind formulates that and repeats it in the presence of God, truth asks, who told you that? Who told you that? So we're therefore invited to use our brilliant reasoning and sensing faculties to not only rely on emotion or feeling alone, right? Because our emotion and our feeling can easily be seduced by the promise of being like God. But the reasoning and the sensing faculties cannot deny what loving awareness brings to the table. So when you ask yourself, who is saying this? Where is this idea coming from? If I'm being presented with an idea or a thought or a possibility or a situation, where is this idea coming from? And more importantly, what framework is it coming through? Is this my ego? Is it your ego? Is it a system of governance? Or is it Christ? Is this truth? Or is this a story that I've heard from somewhere? So any idea that you have about yourself or about the world or about what's possible for you comes from somewhere. Where does it come from? That question, asked not in judgment, but in curiosity, invites your loving awareness, which dispels falsehood quickly and easily, like that, like mist at dawn, really easily. And that simple question, it doesn't matter where you think you are in your spiritual maturity. I know plenty of people who think they're dancing with the gods and goddesses up here. It doesn't matter where you think you are on this scale. That question, who told you that, is always pertinent. Let's look one more time here at the model of human consciousness to see how this lands in the relationship between consciousness, energy, and manifestation. I'm going to give you an example. I had a client last year who came with intense burning sensations, burning symptoms in her digestive system and in her sinuses and in her muscles. So she felt like she was on fire all the time. She'd been to 47 different doctors. She kept going through different strategies, but it kept coming back. So while she could clear it, it kept remanifesting. So we looked at where it came from. Where Who told you this? So where does this come from? And we discovered that she was born into a particular philosophy that put the idea of religious damnation, the idea of original sin, that you are originally sinful, and sin equals eternal damnation in pits of fire and sulfur and horrible, horrible torture, worse than you can imagine, forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Amen. And that was what she was born into. And so her entire culture, her family, her culture, her own self spent their entire lives looking out there for evil. They were looking for deception. Who is out to deceive me? Who is out to get me? Who is out to harm me? Who is out to control me? Who is out to take from me? Who is out to betray me? And so they approached life with incredible suspicion. And look, doesn't that mean that all they could ever see was betrayal and suspicion and damnation? Everything that they experienced was evidence that they were originally sinful and that they would burn forever. And in fact, her body was burning up, literally burning up. So what she'd been doing was going from doctor to doctor, 47 different doctors, different strategies, different diets, different detoxes, different medications, different meditations, all kinds of different things to try and clear it up. And she would improve the symptoms, but it would always re-manifest. Because in the end, the energy that you make agreement with, you can say, let there be light, and then, it is good. Or you can say, let there be light, and this is eternal damnation. You can choose, and the energy that you choose to engage with will manifest in density, which means in the body. So we reframed and we recoded her framework of consciousness. We went through a program of spiritual development and education so that she could adjust those coordinates of consciousness in her framework. And that helped to alleviate the symptoms that she was having. But more importantly, it meant that she could find appropriate medical tactics to clear the symptoms and it wouldn't re-manifest. That's the important thing there. So we can see why we're encoded with the directive to embody only what is good and true. And why in Genesis 3:15, God goes on to list the consequences of holding a framework of consciousness which knows evil. He says, separation is immediate. You're expelled from the garden. Your experience of creation is going to be painful and labored. We've had a beautiful discussion in our group recently about the pangs of childbirth, the pangs of labor in childbirth. And we've had many incredible interpretations of that. But it's a consequence. It's a consequence of outlining what is good and what is evil, that recreation and renewal will always be painful if we're holding on to a framework of consciousness that knows good and evil. So when it comes to recognizing, then, this is the mastery we're exploring, when it comes to recognizing, there are a few things that we need to focus on. Let's look at that bit from Ephesians again. This is Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. You were made dead through the crimes and sins that used to make up your life, when you were living by the principles of this world, thus obeying the ruler who dominates the very air. This is a very compact sentence. There's a lot of meat in this sentence. It indicates three sources of evil. Number one, the crimes and sins of your life. This is what the Catholics call the sin of the flesh. This is our personal participation with not truth, with not love. This is our personal sin, our shadow. The thoughts, the feelings, the actions on an individual level that counter the will of God, or that deny or diminish the experience of love. personal, sin of the flesh. Number 2, he says, when you are living by the principles of this world. This is what the Catholics call the sin of the world. So we have the sin of the flesh, which is personal, and then we have the sin of the world, which is systems of culture based on false or superficial agreements about value, dignity, and success, right? So we have structures of economy, politics, systems of governance, whatnot. All these sorts of things that serve to glorify the structures that they are, things that serve to glorify their own structures. Corporate systemic systems of illusion and manipulation that inform our choices, that oppress our sovereignty, that indoctrinate, that create subtle ideologies that we buy into, things that inform our choices when we're not aware. Like, for example, this diet is the only diet, or this political party is the only political party. Culturally agreed upon limitations and exclusions, tracks of evil that we unconsciously whiz along on. And then the third level, the ruler who dominates the very air. These illusions and deceits which so totally control the field of consciousness that most of us cannot even see. This is the fundamental coding of illusion and deceit. This is that whisper in the night that plants just the seed of doubt, which is enough to unravel all the good work you've done. And these are the subtle frequencies that we all submit to from time to time. When we're not in the knowing, that love commands the spirit to move the substance. And therefore I can dip my hands in a jar of water and it can become wine. When I'm not in that full embodied knowing that I am that powerful as a spiritual co-creator, as soon as I'm not totally embodied and integrated as Christ, then I am vulnerable to these subtle frequencies that would make me believe that not all things are possible in love. At this level, evil is the frequency that dominates the very air that we breathe. And it's a part of the fabric of creation, just like grace, just like abundance. And if I can choose to discern it, then I can choose to allow it or not. So that's its core characteristic, and that's its purpose. So what of its function? How does it do it? How does evil work? Let's look at the Hawkins scale again. Where did I put it? Here's the Hawkins scale again. Okay, there are 2 different dynamics on a macro level, right? Let's get super simplistic here and say, when we're in the presence of truth, we experience an elevation, enlightenment, enhancement. We call it ascension, right? That's what it says right there, ascension. When we're in the presence of falsehood, we experience depression, spiritual decline, entropy. So we can say on a very elemental, very basic level, for you to practice your discernment, truth is strength, falsehood is weakness. We can actually measure this scientifically. We can use subtle energy systems in our own bodies. You can develop the skill of kinesiology, which allows you to use your own muscles, your own system to calibrate the level of truth in anything. And when you have the ability to test the level of truth in anything, then you also have the ability to calibrate it up, to transmute, to improve, to enhance in your experience. And this is sanctification. That's what sanctifying is. This is what happens when you bless your food or you do your energy work. What you're actually doing is elevating the frequency of truth. You're elevating the frequency of the thing you're directing your love into, and you're bringing that closer to truth. So remember, this is the sovereign way. We're not saying that this type of food is better or worse than this type of food, but we are saying that there can be an increased or decreased calibration of truth in anything in your experience. And that by you sanctifying that manifest thing, you are actually transforming, alchemizing that thing, making it more like truth. So for levels of consciousness below 200 on the Hawking scale, it's very easy for evil to operate. From 200 and below, evil has a lot of control, because the human's awareness is fundamentally in illusion. The human is fundamentally believing in illusion already, anywhere below 200. 200 is the level of neutrality. Anything below 200 is illusion. And so because the human's awareness at this point is in illusion, all evil needs to do is to keep it there, right? So if the human awareness is in illusion, then it's not in Christ, it's in Antichrist. So lies like you're worthless have a lot of impact on these people and are extremely effective. So for the level, for a mindset that is below 200, a lie like you'll never make it or you're worthless has impact, has a great amount of impact. But for higher levels of consciousness, let's say between 300 and 500, for higher levels of consciousness, other mechanisms are necessary, because the lie you're worthless has no power over you, because your knowing of your worth is much more powerful. And that's because of magnetism. So someone could come up to you and say, you're never going to make it, and it has no impact on you because you know you are. You're making it already. It might sting a little bit and someone says something mean to you, and that's how you discern it as evil. This is a frequency that's attempting unsuccessfully to divert my attention from the truth. So if evil can't use such outright lies at these levels of consciousness, what can it use? Well, in these mid-range layers of consciousness below 500, your mindset is characterized by conscious, benevolent, innovative mindset. So that means that seduction and manipulation work very well, targeting people's pride, status, or intellect. In these mindsets, we have scientists, we have politicians, we have doctors, we have inventors operating in these sorts of levels here, and seducing the mindset through pride. Eat the apple, it'll make you like a god. Why don't you charge 10 times the amount of what you've got on your price ticket? Because you know you should charge your worth. These sorts of ideas that activate our ego, activate our pride, and shift our attention away from our investment in goodness and truth, and instead into the structures of our own creations. And then above these levels, addiction works. Above these levels, addiction works quite well because it uses your own biochemistry against you. It uses your own biofield to distract you from truth. And so your mind goes, oh, I feel so great when I'm at work. I'm creating from my passion and I'm serving others. That's actually an endorphin rush you're feeling right now, because it's time for bed. It's not time for checking your Facebook feed. You see? So even in the higher levels of consciousness, it is possible for that particular quality of energy to distract you from truth and bring your focus onto structure. So I want you to notice something when you're reading the New Testament. I want you to notice that Jesus never convicts individual people for their sins. He never does that. He never says, you, Jeffrey, you diddled your taxes last year, didn't you? He doesn't say, you, Stacy, you keep branding others narcissistic instead of dealing with your own victim issues. He doesn't say, you, Benjamin, you're using government oppression as an excuse not to take responsibility for your own success. He doesn't say these things. He doesn't point people out. He doesn't blame you for your faults, is really what it comes down to. He loves you so much and knows you so well that he understands that the mistakes you make, the faults you make in mindset, are not from you. It's not your origin. You're not originally sinful. But he does point to systems, though. He does point to collectives. He says, alas for you Pharisees. He says, alas for you Capernaum. He points to systems of governance, systems of illusions. He points to collective cultures. He points to collective agreements. Never, alas for you, Fred. Never. So when we're standing here, beating our chests and lamenting on all our unhealed wounds and terrible mistakes, we're actually getting nowhere. All we're doing is looking at our creation and saying it's evil, which is the opposite of what God did in the creation story. One of my favorite spiritual teachers, Richard Rohr, says that being a Catholic confessor, a confessor in the Catholic ideology is someone who is an intercessor for people. So you can come and you can confess your sins and you can receive a penance of sorts, and then you can go away and feel better about it. You get off your chest, essentially. And he says that being a Catholic confessor is like being stoned to death by marshmallows, which is so funny. And he uses that stoned to death by marshmallows because essentially he sits there and he receives all these sins from people, but actually these sins are like marshmallows because there's no substance to them. Okay, so you had a lustful thought, or you told a lie, or you stole a thing. But these are marshmallows compared to that systemic evil that is causing those actions in the first place. And so our obsession with personal sin has trained people to feel guilty about small acts while turning a blind eye to that systemic evil that's killing us all. But Jesus said in Luke 10:18, he said, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven, and I have given you the authority. I have given you the authority to trample on snakes and on scorpions and overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you. However, do not rejoice that the spirits submit to you, because that would be pride, right? But rejoice that your names are written in heaven. Your name is love. Your name is truth. Remember, you are made in the image of God. You are made of light that can know grace at any time. So, what is the sovereign level of mastery in recognizing truth from falsehood, good from evil? Like I said at the beginning, there is a private 5-week training program, which we call a spiritual accelerator, in which you can become acutely proficient in this mastery. So if you're a spiritual leader or a coach or a therapist or anyone who works with systems or people, this 5-week accelerator is an incredible opportunity for you. It will help you to hear directly from God in your own way. It'll help you to dissolve and to recognize and dissolve false structures and to create a strategy for dealing with this ongoing issue. You'll become a better coach, a better therapist, a better influencer, a better father, a better wife, and it will prepare you even more to know only love. But today, notice these questions. Number 1, recognize. Is this dynamic that I'm sensing, is this dynamic inherent in the situation or feeling or thought process? Is it supporting me and others to become more like God, or is it pulling us further from God? Is there an essential outcome of hopeful empowerment or decline? That's the first level of recognizing. Recognize the dynamic. Am I looking into God, into eternal truth, into empowerment, into all possibility and all renewal, or am I investing in a structure? Am I moving further from God? Number 2, recognize. Is what I'm looking at truth or story? Let's stay there for a minute. This is a useful device to help you learn the difference between truth or story. Number 1, ask yourself, what is occurring versus what is happening? I like that one. So what is occurring is what is actually actualizing out here in the fourth dimension, out here in space and time, what actually occurred. For example, I received an email from my employer. That actually occurred. What happened, however, was that I saw that email. It triggered in me the emotion of frustration and fear because I assumed that it might have something to do with that deadline that I've missed. And so because my biochemistry now responded to that trigger in the world, then what happened was that I went into the thought process of that employer is so pushy and is always trying to get me to do this or that or whatever. So my thought process, my narrative now matches my biochemistry. And because now I'm thinking about what that employer is probably up to, now it's changing my feeling, and I'm feeling resentment towards them, or I'm feeling impatience towards them. And as a result of that, pop you on mute there, my friend. Mute. Why isn't that working? Oh well, I'll have to talk over you. So because my thought processes have now responded to my emotions. Now I'm feeling a particular way. So I'm feeling resentment or something like that. And because I'm feeling that way, now I'm acting in a certain way. So perhaps I'm not apologizing for missing the deadline, or perhaps I'm not making the right decisions for my promotion or whatever it might be. So my behavior has changed. All of that has happened. But what occurred was that an email landed in my inbox. So you can really empower yourself by separating what has occurred versus what has happened. This happened to me this week. Someone I love and trust, a confidant of mine, left me some voice messages. That's all, just some voice messages. I listened to the voice messages, and there was some information in the voice messages. And what happened with that information was that I listened to it, I had an emotional response, it shifted my thought pattern, and I viewed the world differently. And suddenly some characters in my world had turned from allies to villains, just like that. That was all a story. That wasn't what actually occurred, but it was what happened. So we have to be humble and discerning in choosing to know what is truth and what is story, what has occurred and what has happened. So the first was recognize the dynamic. Are we going into God, or are we going further from God? The second, recognize, am I looking at truth or am I looking at story? Is this something that has occurred, or is it something that is happening to me? And third, recognize structure or essence. So let's look one more time at this one here. I told you this was a meaty lesson. Let's look one more time here. Consciousness knows a shape and then commands spirit to move a shape, and the adamantine particles make up shape. So that's the relationship. This is all essential. And as soon as adamantine particles have formed a shape, we have a structure. Don't be afraid of structure, just know what it is and understand that structure is mortal, so it has no command over your life. Essence is immortal, and that's where true command comes from. Let me give you a real example. When my family became homeless a few years ago, my husband and I learned very quickly that in order to survive, we had to tap into the essence of home. We had to know the difference between home and house. We had to know that we were houseless, not homeless. Because if we had invested in the structure of house, we would have seen that we were terrible failures, and we were all doomed because there was no house. When there was no structure for us to have a home inside, we had to cultivate the essence of home. We had to hang up the fairy lights or put little blankets out, and we would have little rituals together. Every evening we would meditate together, we'd tell stories together, we'd play Scrabble by the candlelight, and we'd do these things to cultivate an inner essence of home. And by focusing on home, which is an immortal essence, we were able to very quickly recreate house, which is a structure in which essence can abide. So we lost the structure, but we didn't lose the essence. And by cultivating the essence, what manifested 10 weeks into that journey was a mansion beyond our imagination, a beautiful mountain cabin on 180 acres of Rocky Mountain splendor just came to us. We didn't have to build it. We didn't have to earn it. We didn't have to buy it. It became ours just like that. And we lived there for 7 glorious months. So spirit can recreate any structure you want at any given time, as long as you're holding on to essence. If your investment is in house and you lose your house, you've lost everything. But if your essence is on home and you lose your house, then that essence of home will recreate house very quickly. So listen, here's another thing about structure. If you know your own structure, if you know your own personality, your own modus operandi, this is very, very good for you to discern the voice of God. Because God knows your language. Do you know your language? Do you know when God speaks to you? Do you know how God can get through to you? If you're expecting your relationship with God to be made of mind-blowing, transcendental, interdimensional astral projections, you might be missing the beauty he's speaking to you in the still small voice. And conversely, if you're obsessing over achieving perfect stillness so you can hear his still small voice, are you missing the humorous ways he's speaking to you in everyday numbers, jokes, and animals? I know plenty of people who have never seen a double rainbow. I see them every week. Knowing your personality structure will help you identify the path of least resistance for the Holy Spirit to communicate with you. So knowing structure is a good thing. You don't have to try and pretend that you don't have a personality shape, that you don't have an identity. You may be more extroverted than introverted. You may be more of a thinker than a feeler. Did you know God can speak to you through your thoughts? God can speak to you in vibration. God can speak to you in all kinds of marvelous ways. It's all in the Bible. It's all biblical. So let's summarize. If you can remember the truth of who you are, then you can also recognize who you're not. Evil is an inherent idea in potentiality that we can personify as the devil to help us identify and relate to it. But it isn't contained in a singular, particularized entity. Rather, it is in the air that we breathe. It distorts our perspective and causes us to invest in illusion instead of loving potential. And the Bible teaches us to ask, who said that? And to use our analysis. Are we going up or down? Is this truth or story? Is this essence or structure? And now a final demonstration before we end for today. A final demonstration. I think I'm going to draw this one. This is my favorite one. Right. So here we are with a consciousness. Is that dark enough? Maybe I need a darker one. Here we are with a consciousness that knows good and evil. And as a result, we are projecting and experiencing good and evil. But inherent impossibility as a precedent for human experience is another framework of consciousness that knows 100% I am that I am, and cannot be swayed, cannot be manipulated, because it is perfectly in the knowing of source, spirit, and substance, distinct but one. And so the energy that projects is 100% pure love. It's not good and evil, it's only love. And the proximity that you have to that framework of consciousness dictates to what extent that energy of pure love sanctifies your experience in an alchemy that calibrates what you're manifesting into a higher level of truth. In other words, how much mercy can you receive? And what we tend to do is we tend to spend our lives trying to identify and discern and navigate and weed out these frequencies of illusion out of our own framework of consciousness so that we can improve our proximity to Christ, so that we can increase the amount of space and time in our life that we are sanctified. But there's a better way. There's a better way. Because instead of walking with Christ, right? So this is walking with Christ. Instead of that, look, here is that consciousness that forever overcame evil, that forever knows itself 100% embodied in truth. Christ mind exists. And you've chosen to align your framework of consciousness underneath that one. You've chosen to live inside that frequency of 100% pure love. You've said, be my Lord, right? This is now a lordship. So now you're inside an intercessory field where Jesus Christ holds you in an embrace of mercy and grace. And you're liberated from the systems of illusion. You're liberated from the ties that bind. And look now, not just a small part of your life is touched by that grace, but all of your life is touched by that grace, bringing you entirely to life, filling you with life force, filling you with renewal, because he is your Lord and your Savior. So now from this point on, when you drift off into illusion, guess what? He brings you back, because that's part of the deal. That's part of the covenant. That's part of what you've chosen. When you say that instead of walking with Christ, you will now walk in Christ. In. Like that. So finally, let me remind you that we are not trying to eradicate evil. We're not trying to weed out evil, because evil is inherent in the air that we breathe. But rather, we are just trying to remember to tell what the weather is. In fact, let me say, we will never win the battle over evil. We cannot, because our human consciousness knows both good and evil. And besides, that battle has already been won. It's already been won. So we are just learning how to recognize the weather so we know when to use our umbrella. From now on, when it rains, just put the umbrella up. You don't have to overthink it. And finally, let me end with this lovely, lovely bit from Philippians 4:8. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is good, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Thank you for coming along today, for joining this session. I know it was meaty. I hope that you were able to relax throughout the session and just receive. I'm now going to end the live stream and we're going to open the table for our students in the Oasis. Once again, thank you for following along in the Sovereign Way. Blessings on your day.